Hello, and welcome to STEAM of Consciousness, a program presented by the ARI Podcasting Network and hosted by George Koperna. What is STEAM? STEAM stands for Science, Technology, Engineering, Art, and Mathematics. During each episode, we will take a few minutes to sit down with professionals in different STEAM-related fields to give them an opportunity to share their story and give their perspectives with the goal of promoting career awareness to potentially interested students, young professionals, and of course, anyone else who shares a fascination with these areas of study. And now, please join us as we tap into the STEAM of Consciousness.
Welcome to STEAM of Consciousness, a podcast by the ARI Podcasting Network. Today, we're really happy to have Dr. Sallie Greenberg of Sallie Greenberg Consulting. She's the owner. Welcome, Sallie.
Thank you. Great to be here today.
So, Sallie, tell us a little bit about what you do in your day-to-day.
So I'm an independent consultant. I spent 30 years working at the University of Illinois at the Illinois State Geological Survey, primarily in the area of carbon capture and storage and some degree in critical minerals. So my day job now, since retiring from the university a few years ago, is to work as a strategic advisor with companies and industry and academics to develop carbon management programs, projects, strategize on how to participate in the ever-changing world of energy and the environment.
And if we were to step in our way back machines and go back to young Sallie, would you have ever thought that you would leverage your geoscience degrees into doing what you're doing today?
I have to say no. Certainly, if you're going to go way back, I would not have ever expected to be a scientist or to have had the career that I had. I didn't grow up with an interest in science or mathematics. I was more of a humanities focused student in high school and found my way into science much later in life. And I think at some point I thought maybe I would be an academic, but that didn't really take hold, even though I spent 30 years, like I said, at the Illinois State Geological Survey. That was really as an applied scientist. And so for me, the minute I stepped into a laboratory, which in my case was clay mineralogy and low temperature geochemistry related work, I was hooked. So for
So,
me, it was really laboratory work that sucked me in as a geologist and put me on the random path that I'm on today.
let's connect two of those dots just for a second. You mentioned that you were really interested in more humanities. What got you in the laboratory?
So I am in my mid 20s, was a secretary at an investment bank in Chicago. And it was the 20th anniversary of the first Earth Day. And if you do the math, you can figure out how old I am. And
25.
I started to get really interested in the environment. There were a lot of books out at the time about, what we as individuals could do to have a lighter touch on the earth and that sort of thing. And I had a momentary revelation at the age of 25 that I could either be a secretary for the rest of my life, or I could go back to school, finish college, and maybe do something else. And that something else at that moment focused on environmental studies. So I started on this path of looking for a university to go to where I could do environmental related work, and that then set me on the path to on the very first day of at Alfred University, which is where I ended up going. My undergraduate advisor said to me, I have some advice which you can choose to follow or not, and that is that if you want to have influence in the sciences that she recommended double majoring in one of the hard sciences in addition to environmental studies. My choices were geology, physics, or chemistry. And I thought geology sounded the least scary of those three things. And so I became a geologist pretty much, from that moment on. And then I ended up in the laboratory. My advisor was a clay mineralogist, so I did some things with her. But the next summer, I worked as a research assistant at the University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, also doing clay mineralogy. And just everything about the process, the physical process of laboratory science was super, super appealing to me and very satisfying.
And you see this smile on my face, and if I were to have like a tagline for what we do here on these discussions, it's to really highlight how non-traditional everyone's path is. Everyone's different, everyone has a different path, and certainly yours is no exception. And so the question that I have for you is that's a big leap. You have a job, you're like, is this what I want to do? I want to do. Was there any other resources at the time that you sought out? I mean, we didn't really have a lot of internet capacity back in the day, but did you have a peer that you relied on or talked to, or it was just both feet in and you went?
So I think the approach what catapulted me was I did an outward bound leadership course in the Boundary Waters in Minnesota in October. So it snowed. It was, it was a very intense experience, but that, being in nature, being outside, and Outward Bound is one of those programs where they have you think about what are your values and what do you want to put out into the world and who do you want to be. So I had a little bit of that happening in my head, and I came back from the Outward Bound experience and thought, oof, I am highly motivated to no longer be a secretary or an administrative assistant. So I started to do my own research, and at the time it was like the U.S. report on, it was a magazine that came out every year, the U.S. report on the top 100 colleges and things like that. So I looked specifically for universities that had programs in the environmental sciences. And so, I had a list of, I don't know, 10 or more, and narrowed that down, visited some of them, talked to, friends and family. Like one of my brothers had, knew people who were geologists or were in the science field. But, it was a lot of trial and error. And really what it came down to with Alfred was financial assistance, because what every other university failed to realize was that even though I had a salary as a secretary, the minute I quit that job, I no longer had that salary. So I was literally, um, you know, going from a reasonable income, not a great income, but to zero income. And so Alfred was the only university that made it possible for me to do that.
Well, I mean that's a boon, and I remember looking at those U.S. News and World Report or whatever it was
Yeah.
magazines too to try to. There weren't that many choices for petroleum engineering, but
No, well,
um,
had that been my path, it might have been easier to decide. So, yeah.
but when you were at Alfred, so you've moved over, and as part of your assistantship, you had a job, and obviously it was probably working with a professor, doing the lab work. So that flipped your light switch, and you said, "Wow." Is that when you knew you'd made the right choice, at least in the near term?
So Alfred it was a good choice for me, although I went from living in downtown Chicago to living in a one road river valley in Alfred, New York, to a very small liberal arts college, which was great. It was a good place for me. But so the classes were good. Going back to school was good, although I had, momentary episodes of panic because I thought, what have I done, and why am I here? But that summer that first summer when I got into the lab and there's a lot of purpose behind laboratory work, and you are folding and weighing and centrifuging and spending time in that environment solving real problems. And that for me was the thing that really lit me up. And when I went back to Alfred the fall of my second year, I said to my advisor, I want to be a geologist. And so it flipped the balance from focus on being an environmentalist to being a geologist with environmental background. So I ended up doing a double major, but my bachelor's degree is in geology and my master's degree is in geology as well, in geochemistry.
And so we were at Alfred, you're about ready to graduate, and you've decided you're going to be a geologist. Your next choice is, do I go back to the private sector? Do I go on for continued education? How was that decision process for you? How were you trying to marry that choice to what you wanted and needed?
Yeah, so for me, it was never a question of going to industry. It was always a question of where to go for graduate school, because my assumption was that I needed a master's degree. And somebody asked me recently if there was anything I would do differently as an undergraduate. And the thing that I said to them was that I didn't even consider industry, especially did not consider the oil and gas industry. And I have no regrets in life, but that was probably a mistake, because now, knowing what I know now, I think I might have thrived in the dynamic environment and the multitude of opportunities that you get from moving around a major, large corporation with the opportunity to do a lot of different things every few years. Um, but that was not the path that I chose. So I had in my head, as I finished at Alfred, master's degree to a PhD, because at that time you didn't skip the master's degree either.
And so you went to the University of Illinois, and was that a hard choice, or did you do your work and reach out to your peers and all of that to downsize?
So I was pretty focused on clay mineralogy, and for geologists, often you're applying not necessarily to a school, but to work with somebody in particular. And so I looked at Georgia, I looked at University of Massachusetts, I looked at Illinois, I looked at SUNY Binghamton, and maybe one other place, because there were very specific people that I wanted to work with. I had already worked with the people at Illinois, and so that made that decision maybe a little bit more of a known instead of an unknown, and made that transition a little bit easier maybe. But it was and that source of information really came from my advisor, me knowing, what type of geology I wanted to focus on, relationships that she had, that I had, and that's how the decision got made.
And so 2 years went by probably pretty fast in your master's program.
3 years, but
3 years.
yes.
Wow. Um, and was there any, you had started that process saying master's to PhD. Did that stick? Did that stay? did you think of varying your choices for where you got your PhD, or you just decided to stay where you stayed?
So, yeah, so it changed a lot. Graduate school was a bit of a struggle for me, and for a variety of reasons. Um, and what I realized somewhere along the way was if I was successful as a PhD and ended up with an academic position, that it was going to take me out of the laboratory. And, so your job then becomes to get funding for people to bring students along for them to carry forward the work that you have started. And that wasn't as appealing to me as being able to do the work myself. The other thing that happened was I did some isotope geochemistry for my master's project and at the Illinois State Geological Survey, which is on the University of Illinois campus. And and then I ended up getting a part-time job at the survey. So that I had the opportunity to segue that into a full-time job and work at the Illinois State Geological Survey and be in the sciences and be working on samples. And so the PhD in geology got put on hold, got paused. Fast forward 7 or 8 years, um, and I decided to do a PhD in education at the University of Illinois. So my PhD is actually in what's called secondary and continuing education, and focuses on really the place where science and society and policy and economics all meet, which is a very messy space, as you know, that we've been operating in terms of carbon capture and storage since the very beginning. And my entrance into CCS coincided with my entrance into my PhD program. So it was a natural progression of how to carry that work forward.
And we met not long after that, but
Indeed.
I, messy to say the least, and it still might be a little
Yeah,
untidy for
yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Um, but as you started to marry these two things together, and I think it's really important to be able to communicate to the layperson as well as the technical person. What kind of things did you learn and leverage and work through as you started to progress through the CCS, the nascent CCS industry? Because this is early 2000s to mid 2000s.
Yeah, yeah. It's a great question. So, I've always relied on my own experience. As I started out telling you, I didn't start out to be a scientist. So my brain doesn't necessarily, wasn't trained that way early on. And so it takes me a lot of time and effort to understand things that as I'm reading them, peer-reviewed journal articles, papers, all the work that went into me becoming a geologist involved in my own head, in my notes, in my interactions with professors and colleagues, breaking down complicated concepts into the simplest form. So I happened to be talented in that area, and I did a lot of professional development for teachers in between getting my master's and when I started the PhD. So that 8 year period in between, I spent a lot of time figuring out how to talk about geology. I was a TA at some point. Like, what were the basics? And then applied that to carbon capture and storage. The rest of it came along The ability to communicate to policymakers or to um, work with communities and understand where people's perspectives lie. Some of that is based in my training as a social scientist, which was a big part of my PhD program. So, how to run focus groups, how to evaluate programs, how to put forward other ideas, bring voice to other people's ideas. All of that sort of was woven into the PhD. But some other things that were super helpful to me that I didn't really realize at the time was media training, presentation training. My undergraduate advisor, Michelle Lukey, who's retired from Alfred University, was insistent that we become good writers. You would submit something to her and it would come back bleeding red. Knowing how to use spreadsheets and all this kind of really basic tools, but all of those things, and even the organizational skills that I had as a secretary, all of that, got thrown into the soup of like what has made me successful and my ability to kind of pull together a lot of different perspectives. I'm very much a big picture person rather than a drill down into the finite details person. So I'm looking for what's the overview that I can, you know, garner and convey. Last thing I'll say on this is that the other thing is that we have a great set of colleagues. Many of us have known each other for 25 years or more, and people are very generous with their time and answering questions. You go out on a drill rig and ask somebody like what's happening, and they want to tell you. Geologists are very excited about what we do. So again, people are, like you have a lot of people who like to talk about what they do and why they do it.
And I think one of the things that you did that was just so illuminating and eye-opening was, a little slight slap on the technical back of the wrist. Stop showing the layperson things that you do in your business because they don't necessarily understand it. You have exaggerated dimensions or something, and make fit for purpose presentations, because that's what it is. And don't show exaggerated graphics that make it look like 10,000 feet below the surface is this much, because communicating that is difficult.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes down to basic communication skills, right? Know your audience, scale and perspective matter. I learned that this dates me. You put a camera lens cap on an outcrop to take a picture. You remember when we used to do that, or a rock hammer or something, So just all of those things are part of knowing how to engage and interact with people. And I have many stories in my backpack, but I was at a public meeting once, and I was talking to a farmer about carbon storage, and I had this whole agenda of things in my head I wanted to say to him, and about how enhanced oil recovery works and how carbon is stored and all this kind of stuff. And he said to me, I'll never forget it. Yeah, look, I get it. You're going to put it in the subsurface and it's going to stay there. But what I want to know is, are you going to dig up my driveway? And how is this going to impact my property value? And I had this revelation where it was like, you know what? Like, you actually just have to listen to people, and they are going to tell you how to direct the conversation. Because the guy was like, yeah, look, I'm a farmer, I'm smart, I understand the soil, at least, if not the deep subsurface. But what I care about isn't necessarily what somebody else cares about.
And it's a really good point to remember, and I think we should underscore that just a little bit. But that was your entry to CCS, and you didn't stay in the outreach part, but it was a really, at that time, a very, very important part. It was
Yeah.
almost the front lines, because there wasn't really regulatory environments. We were trying to explain as technical people what we were planning to do. And so how did you like that evolution from more of the softer side to the more dedicated technical side?
So I'll start out by saying I bristle at the distinction of hard versus soft skills.
Fair.
It makes me uncomfortable because I would argue that the technical aspect of what we do is easier than everything else. So the soft stuff is actually harder than the hard stuff,
Mhm.
in my mind, and because the technical has very clear boundaries, definitions, approaches, and you're trying to solve a very specific problem, which to some degree is unchanging. Whereas when you talk about all the other things, then those involve humans. They involve changing policies. Different. They are so dynamic and influence each other so much that it's very complicated. For me, the way that the transition happened into the more technical to leading major project and other components of what I do now really came because I was fortunate enough to sit in on all the development meetings for proposals, all of I was included in everything. And again, one of my talents is being able to listen to what's going around me and make connections about what the importance of that is. So I worked very closely with Robert Finley, who was the original principal investigator of the Midwest Geological Sequestration Consortium, and um, was always listening to what was being decided in the technical world for how does that relate to what we need to be communicating to people, or where, providing guidance on, perhaps we want to state something differently, or, um, you know, where our communication should be focused. I went to Washington quite often with Rob to brief our Illinois legislative delegation, talked to many, many people in the state government in Illinois, built relationships, and over time became the person who knew the most big picture component of the MGSC Regional Carbon Sequestration Partnership Program. And then ultimately, when Rob retired in 2015, I stepped in as the principal investigator to the Illinois Basin Decatur project, which was our major carbon capture and storage project in conjunction with Archer Daniels Midland in Decatur, Illinois. So I moved because of the knowledge and the ability to communicate, moved into that project management space as the next natural leader of that group. And then I had the privilege and the task of bringing that project to a close 8 years later. So it was a 17-year long effort, if you think about the MGSC, and institutional knowledge and relationships and understanding the dynamics of how decisions were made. All of those things factored into me being able to apply knowledge in a more technical uh, realm than perhaps was we could have predicted from my early beginnings.
Yeah, and when you say bring that project to a close, it was really the R&D part of it. The commercial part is still ongoing today.
Absolutely. Yeah,
And so it really informed, in a lot of ways, was our first pure sequestration project in the U.S. So kudos to you and your team for that. And looking back at your time at ISGS, which was a long time, you did a lot of other things. And where did you kind of go? Okay, I've done it all. It's time for me to put my shingle out. And was that a hard decision, or was it you just knew it was time?
That is also a very good question. So, some of those decisions had to do with um, the the way retirement works. I have a traditional pension, so I knew the date at which I could opt into the traditional pension. So that was a factor. Um, the, you know, the working on the same thing for 17 years. And when I say the same thing, I mean the same project for 17 years was a lot. It was an amazing experience. I had an amazing career at the Illinois State Geological Survey. But, the last few years, I definitely wanted to spread my wings, grow a little bit more, have some different experiences. And then that all was going on and the pandemic hit. So I spent the first 2 years of the pandemic knowing that I had the potential to retire. I didn't have to, but I knew when I could. And then in my mind, always, I had been thinking, what is my next big thing? Like, what would I do after the ISGS? And so, I thought that would be like go into industry or leave the ISGS when I was able, and then work for somebody else is really what I thought would happen. If the pandemic had not occurred, I would never have had the experience of working from home. And I spent the first year and a half finishing up the Illinois Basin Decatur project, figuring out how to deliver terabytes worth of data, final reports, all this kind of stuff. Um, and, but also, I started to get the feeling of what it would be like to be a consultant because I wasn't tied to an office. I was working on, sort of my own projects, and I thought, I could do this. And so that's really where the idea to hang my shingle came from, was because I had the experience. But again, if I had never if we had not sat and worked at home for a couple of years, I don't think I would have gotten there. I think I would have just kept on the same path that I was on, and maybe I would have come to you and asked for a job, or one of the many other people that I know. But so that stuff all kind of played in together. The other thing that the pandemic did for me was it slowed me down and focused me in on my own professional and leadership development. And I spent a lot of time looking at what I wanted for the next step and how to get there. And I think if we had been on our regular trajectory, I would not have had that super important pause to really be reflective.
So the pandemic at least had, I won't call it a silver lining, but a beneficial lining in some way for you to give you some time.
The way I look at it is that there's a gift in every situation, including the situation we're in now. And that gift for me was that time and space and opportunity to really dive in and understand, and in a planful way, figure out what my next step was.
So A couple questions to kind of, we're approaching the end here, and
Sure.
I want to make sure I don't monopolize all your time. This has been great, but two questions I like to kind of ask to kind of close out. So whether it's younger you or someone else, what kind of advice would you give to a young person today that's looking to enter the STEAM area?
I think you need to be the master of your own career. And what I mean by that is that you have a responsibility to yourself to cultivate and create the career that you want. And you do that by um, making yourself open and available to the opportunities that come your way. So, a phrase that I really think about a lot is that chance favors the prepared mind. So, almost everything that happened to me in this career of mine happened because I met somebody and had a conversation in the hallway, or I saw a book in a bookstore, or and like you need to cultivate the the ability to craft and guide your own career. Figure out who you can connect with to be a teacher. A close colleague of ours, Richard Esposito, told me about this concept at Southern Company about um, like knowing the company, learning the company, being a student of the company. So whatever you do, wherever you are, be a student of that thing. Other advice that I got from a professor at the University of Illinois was to attend the whole university. Don't just go there to go to graduate school in your thing, but go to the symphony, go to art exhibits, like broaden your understanding and interaction with the world, because you never know when something that you're doing is going to trigger something for you, an opportunity for you.
Excellent advice. And let's close with this one. What do you love about what you do?
I love that it's different every single day.
And that's why I love my job too. So I'm with you. And again, this has been a product of the ARI Podcasting Network. I really like to thank Dr. Sallie Greenberg for taking time from her busy schedule to join us. I'd like to thank Ryan Kessler for producing this podcast. Till next time.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in. Be sure to listen to new episodes of Stream of Consciousness, available on your preferred podcast listening station.